Hi there, I'm Marcie Billen and I'm a real estate agent in Norman, Oklahoma. And today I want to explain to you the Oklahoma real estate contract that you might be using if you're thinking about purchasing a house here. So let's get started. Okay, so the Oklahoma real estate contract is 6 pages. There's a lot of other things that go with it too, depending on the offer terms for the house itself. So at the top of this Oklahoma real estate contract, we see a bunch of contract document boxes, right? So conventional loan, FHA, VA loan. These are the two that we use the most. We have to disclose to the seller what type of loan is being used to purchase the house. So that's where these come in. And I will make more videos about these loan supplements and how they work and why they're different. Because each one is very different. And then other ones we might use that would go with this residential sale contract would be the Single Family Mandatory Homeowners Association. That one we use quite a bit. And then, of course, these contingency contracts right here. But it totally depends on what we're trying to do and how you're trying to purchase the property or sell if you're a seller watching this. Okay. So at the top of this real estate contract, this is the offer document, which is actually not a contract until both parties have signed it. At the top, you see the seller and the buyer. So that's just their names and what the title company will use to convey title and then deed it out of someone's name. Here, we have to say, of course, which county this property's in, or maybe, the same address in another county. We have the legal description, which is what the survey describes the property as. And then, of course, the property address at the bottom. And down here it says, together with all fixtures and improvements, subject to existing zoning ordinances, plat or deed restrictions, utility easements serving the property, including all mineral rights owned by the seller, but if the mineral rights have already been split from the property, then it is excluding all mineral rights and they can be owned separately from the actual land itself. Number 2, purchase price, earnest money, and source of funds. So in this blank here is where we would write in how much you're offering for the property itself, not the list price, but how much you're offering. This second blank is the earnest money amount. So how much you're going to put up for earnest money. There is not a hard and fast amount here in Oklahoma. And we'll go into whether or not that's refundable as well. And then the third blank here is where the earnest money will be held, usually held at a title company or at the buyer's agent's trust account at their office, sometimes a listing agent too. It totally depends. And then after that, it says that you have to deliver the earnest money to that trust account within 3 days. And are we hard and fast on this? Like, not all the time, because it's hard to get earnest money sometimes within 3 days, just depending on the situation. But we have to deliver that earnest money within 3 days. If the last day of those 3 days is a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday, then we go ahead and move that to the next day. Number 3, closing, funding, and possession. So this is when you would be closing, like signing all the documents. The closing process includes execution of documents, delivery of deed, and receipt of funds by seller, and shall be completed on or before a date. If you're asking like how many days you would typically have to do a closing, usually 30 to 45. Can go longer. Shorter is also done depending on the type of loan. And then at the bottom here, it says, in addition to costs and expenses otherwise required to be paid in accordance with terms of the contract, buyer shall pay buyer's closing fee, buyer's recording fees, and all other expenses required from the buyer. Seller shall pay doc stamps, seller's closing fee, seller's recording fee, if any, and all other expenses required from the seller. Funds required from the buyer and seller at closing shall be cash, cashier's check, wire transfer, or as determined by the provider of the settlement services. Typically not cash. Don't bring cash to the closing table. Not a good idea. So with this, if you're wondering like, oh, there's extra expenses outside of the actual price of the house. Yes, there's extra expenses. Each time we put in an offer for you, or if you're the seller, each time you receive an offer, we do a buyer cost sheet or a seller net sheet to show you how much it's going to cost you to buy or sell and how much you're going to get back as an estimate. And if you're interested in watching a video that explains that, you can see that right here. Okay, number 4, and I get questions about this a lot. The biggest question I get with accessories and equipment and systems inside the house is, does the stove stay? Most of our stoves are like a slide-in instead of a built-in. And yes, the stove does stay, and it says it right here. Freestanding slide-in, drop-in kitchen stove stays with the house unless otherwise excluded. Other things that stay with the house: garage door openers, fences, mailboxes, all of that fun stuff. Letter A. So if there's anything that you want to include with the house, it's going to go on A. So those inclusions typically are washer and dryer and refrigerator. If the seller is offering those or would like to leave those, sometimes we can't reach that agreement. Exclusions are typically, the main ones I see are above ground pools, maybe a hot tub. Other ones are like a piece of like play equipment for children. Those are typical exclusions. Of course, you don't have to ask for anything to be excluded. It's just sometimes we ask for those, and that can really get crazy depending on what's out there, right? Number 5, time period specified in contracts. So the beautiful thing about this Oklahoma real estate contract is that it really lays out the timeline for the contract itself, right? So with the timeline for the contract, we have a time period for investigations, inspections, and reviews and financing supplement, and what day that's going to commence on. And me myself, I write a date in here. I like to start it on a Monday, just depends on when we went under contract, because otherwise it says the date, regardless of the date the contract is signed by buyer and seller, the day after the time reference date shall be counted as day 1 if left blank. And that's why I don't leave it blank, because I don't like to do that. The time reference date shall be the 3rd day after the last day of signatures of the parties. So I just like to put in a date for that. Number 6, the residential property condition disclosure. So whenever you're putting in an offer on a house, this is the second document that I will send you to sign. And it's a 3-page document, and I can go over it in another video, and I will. But what it is something that protects the seller from litigation. So you're telling the buyer about the defects in the property that you know about. So no representations by seller regarding the condition of property or environmental hazards are expressed or implied other than as specified in the Oklahoma Residential Property Condition Disclosure Statement or the disclaimer statement. A real estate licensee has no duty to the seller or buyer to conduct an independent inspection of the property and has no duty to independently verify accuracy or completeness of any statement made by the seller in the disclosure statement and any amendment or the disclosure statement. I read that because it's so important that you as the seller especially fill out that disclosure statement to the best of your ability and do not lie. Do not lie on that document because it will bite you in the butt later. Number 7, investigations, inspections, and reviews. So number 5, we have the start date for our investigations, inspections, and reviews. Number 7 is saying how long we have to do investigations on the house. Depending on the length of the contract, I write in 10 to 15 days here. And then B discusses a non-exhaustive list of the types of inspections you can get on a house. So typical ones: home inspection, roof inspection, structural inspection, which are all right here. Environmental risks, like basically you can get an inspection for whatever you would like. Okay, and then on letter C, what do we do with that investigation, that inspection report that we get on the house? Because we highly, highly recommend the inspection, and it is not required by law to get an inspection on the house. That is a huge misconception I hear from buyers and sellers all the time, that you have to get an inspection by law on the house and it passes or fails. That is not the case. You do not have to get an inspection, and it does not pass or fail. We just see what's going on with the house. So C, treatments, repairs, and replacements, TRR. So this phase, you may know those words. If you've bought and sold a house before, I really try to call it a repair list and not a TRR. Because you're not a realtor and you probably don't do this every day like I do. Number 1, treatments of termites and other wood-destroying insects. Treatment and repair costs in relation to termites and other wood-destroying insects shall be limited to the residential structure, garages, and other structure as designated in paragraph 13 of the contract and as provided in subparagraph C2B below. Basically, treatment of termites is something that we deal with in a TRR, but oftentimes we put it also in the actual offer itself, because you definitely want to make sure that you get that treated one way or the other. Number 2, Treatments, repairs, and replacements review. Okay, so how this works, it's 24 hours after your inspection period is over, we can deliver a TRR or repair list to the seller asking for things to be repaired that are a defect. So right here, defect means a condition, malfunction, or problem, which is not decorative, that will have a materially adverse effect on the property or the value of a system or the component. So it has to be a defect. It can't be, fun stuff like carpet or paint, right? Unless the paint is like peeling on the outside. That's a whole other story. And then here it says buyer and seller shall have blank days. 7 is what we always leave here, typically, unless we're dealing with something weird, after the seller's or seller's broker receipt of the TRR form to negotiate the items. So we deliver the repair list to the seller if you're the buyer, and then the seller has 7 days. We have 7 days to negotiate this out. After 7 days, then it should be done. Usually get it done way faster than that. If we need more time, then we just go ahead and sign an extension. D, expiration of buyer's right to cancel the contract. So this is probably the question that you've been waiting for. How do I get out of this contract if I am a buyer and I don't want the house anymore? Or something came up that was just too much. It was too much. So failure of buyer to complete one of the following within the time periods and investigations, inspections, or reviews paragraph shall constitute acceptance of the property regardless of its condition. So what it's saying is we have to perform these actions or we can't cancel the contract. That's what your realtor is for, to help you through this and to make sure you're staying on task with the dates in the contract. So you've got to perform your investigations during the time allowed. Very important. You've got to deliver a written list of the repair list form of items to be treated, repaired, or replaced, or you have to cancel the contract within all that time period. So here's what it is. You, as the buyer, can cancel the contract, get your earnest money back at any time during the investigations portion. So that's typically 10 to 15 days, all the way up until you have a signed repair list by both buyer and seller. You can get out of the contract at any time during that. And you can get your earnest money back, but you do have to pay for things you already ordered on the, during the contract, like home inspection, maybe appraisal if it already happened, things like that. Okay, another way to get out of the contract, if you're a buyer, after expiration of the time periods and investigations, inspections, and reviews paragraph, buyer's inability to obtain a loan based on unavailability of hazard insurance coverage shall not relieve the buyer of obligation to close transaction. So if you can't get hazard insurance, meaning home insurance, on the house, and you don't find out until after the inspection period is over, then that does not give you the right to get out of the contract. Unless your hazard insurance puts you over what you can qualify for on a loan, it's it's interesting on that end. That rarely happens, but that's why we do the investigations period, to make sure that you can get home insurance on the house. And then number 3, after expiration of the time periods and investigations, inspections, and reviews, any square footage calculation of the dwelling, including but not limited to appraisal or survey, indicating more or less than quoted, shall not relieve the buyer of the obligation to close this transaction. So if you're really worried about the square footage of the house, you better get it measured during the inspection period and not just during appraisal, because the appraisers do measure it. Okay, letter E. So inspection of treatments, repairs, and replacements, and final walkthrough. Of course, if we ask for things to be fixed, then we need to make sure they're fixed before you finally sign the documents at the closing table. So buyer or other persons buyer deems qualified may perform re-inspections of the property pertaining to treatments, repairs, and replacements. Typically, it's just you as the buyer, like looking and making sure things got done. Sometimes it's us as the realtors, and we take video or whatever for you. Buyer may perform a final walkthrough inspection, which seller may attend. Seller shall deliver property in the same condition as it was on the date of which contract was signed by buyer, subject to, of course, that repair list. All inspections and re-inspections shall be paid for by the buyer unless prohibited by the mortgage lender. Usually those re-inspections, we don't call for anything that calls for money, but we might. Number 8, risk of loss. So this is homeowner's insurance. So until transfer of title or transfer of possession, risk of loss, homeowner's insurance, ordinary wear and tear, of course, accepted in this contract, so the seller has to keep the home insurance on the property until the buyer signs the papers and it's funded. Number 9, acceptance of property. So buyer, upon accepting title or transfer of possession of the property, so once you sign everything, shall be deemed to have accepted the property in its then condition. So you can't go back to the seller and ask for anything else at that point. If you have questions, sometimes I'll answer you, of course. Just depends. Number 10, title evidence. The seller has to pay to bring our abstract up to date, or the abstract for the property. We're an abstracting state in Oklahoma. The buyer has to purchase the title insurance policy. So right here, seller's expense, seller at seller's expense within 30 days prior to closing date. Sometimes happens that fast. Agrees to make available to the buyer the following: complete and current surface rights only abstract of title, a copy of seller's existing title insurance policy. So the attorneys go over all this stuff, make sure everything's clear, and then a uniform commercial code search certificate, which is looking for liens on the property not associated to real estate. So make sure that everything's clear on that property and you're not going to owe anything that's not yours if you're the buyer. And of course, to clear out anything on your end, if you're the seller, that you may have on the property that you need to take care of. Typical things that the seller has to take care of: homeowners association dues, very typical. Sometimes property taxes. In Oklahoma, you can go 3 years without, you have interest on that, but you can go 3 years typically without, repossession of the property by the state. And then for the buyer, once everything is clear with the title, then they can put their title insurance on the property, which is the buyer's expense. And this is why Oklahoma is a buyer choosing state for title companies, because whatever title company you close at, that is the type of title insurance you're going to be getting. That's how it works. So at buyer's expense, you should obtain a commitment for the issuance of title insurance policy. Title insurance covers a ton of stuff. It is a one-time fee and it is under $1,000 usually. And I would highly, highly always suggest getting title insurance. There is no reason not to. And then you have attorney's title opinion. You have a choice. You don't have to get title insurance if you don't want to. Attorney's title opinion is just like the attorney checking over everything and saying, yep, we're good. And then you don't get any insurance off that. I have never had anyone choose not to get title insurance. So please do that. Okay, letter C. So seller agrees that buyer, at buyer's expense, this is a buyer expense, is going to have a survey done. So there is a land or boundary, a pin stake survey. That's an option, which we don't typically do on residential properties that have already been surveyed and are on file with the county. So for surveys on regular residential properties that have a survey on file, we do what's called a mortgage inspection report, which is that survey paper that has easements on it and boundary lines and everything is pulled. And that usually costs $150-ish for you as the buyer. And you have to have it if you're getting a mortgage. If you're paying cash, you do not have to do it. And that, just tells you where your easements are, your boundaries. And of course, you have to give that to your lender. Letter D, buyer to examine title evidence. So in theory, a buyer has 10 days to look at title evidence on your property. Doesn't always happen for that long. And really the title company, they're the ones that understand how to read title. So they're the ones that are going to help us understand if anything's wrong with title. And then it says that you accept the title subject to utility easements, building and use restrictions, setback and building lines, zoning regulations, reserved and severed mineral rights. So you're accepting title subject to all of that. And if there's an issue with the title, the seller does have to correct it because they own the title. It is their responsibility. So that's letter E. Number 11, so more costs, and this is explaining some more of what we went over on the first page with what costs are, right? One of the big questions I get is property taxes, like how does that work in Oklahoma? What are we doing? So property taxes are called ad valorem taxes in, attorney speak. So general ad valorem taxes for the current calendar year shall be prorated through the day of closing if certified. So what happens in Oklahoma is I'm filming in 2021. So our property taxes for everyone for 2021 are due in December of 2021. In October, they do a reassessment on every property to see how they're going to adjust the taxes according to, prices, mill rate, all this fun stuff. And so if you're closing June 1st on a property, meaning you're buying a property on June 1st, then the seller is going to pay up until June 1st, and then you're going to pay June 1st and after. So the prorated taxes from the day of closing, and how that typically typically works is if you have an escrow account, so you're paying all of your property taxes, insurance, and your principal and interest and monthly payment on your house. With a mortgage, then you're going to be escrowing the funds unless you are exempt from that. And then your mortgage company will pay the property taxes at the end of the year. And then here's some things that are paid by seller at closing: dock stamps, all utility bills that you incurred during owning the property, especially while it's listed. So just clearing all those. All taxes other than general ad valorem taxes, which are or may become a lien on the property. So you may have an extra lien on your property. Any labor, materials, or expenses related to the property which you incurred prior to closing, you must pay. So if you ordered something on your property, you got to pay for it. And we send typically invoices to closing to cover that. If you have a lease on your property and you're selling it with a lease on it, then you would transfer the lease to the buyer. So the buyer would get that lease and any deposit money associated with it. D is covering like memberships and meters. So like in Oklahoma, like we're talking about like a rural water district, which we don't really have many of in central Oklahoma. In northeastern Oklahoma, they're more prevalent, maybe like a fire or sewage or whatever too. E, homeowners association dues are also prorated. And then F is covering special assessments, which if there's a special assessment on the property, I've only had one in my years of real estate experience, and that was on a condo. So the seller has to pay a special assessment. Usually we're talking about like sidewalks or something like that they're repairing in front of your property. They're just like, we need you guys to pay for this. So here's how much it's going to be as a special assessment on your property. Number 12, residential service agreement. So this is a home warranty. So if you haven't had experience for a home warranty before, it's like whenever you buy a computer or a laptop or, and you buy a special warranty on it and it only lasts a couple of years. So a homeowner's warranty or home warranty usually covers 1 year for $550 to $600, depending on the company itself. And sometimes we can have the seller help pay for that. A lot of times this happens like if the systems in the house are very old. So like, the HVAC or the water tank or something. And how a home warranty works is like you pay the amount up front, like I'm getting a home warranty for a year at $600. And then each time you have a claim, and depending on your home warranty, it may cover even the refrigerator, it may cover the washer and dryer, it covers of course systems, it may cover a slab leak, just depending. Then you can go ahead and submit a claim to the company. And with that claim, you have to pay usually $75 or $100, and then they come out and fix it. And all you have to pay is that $75 or $100. So that's how it works. If you have more questions about that, you can shoot me an email or of course talk to your realtor and see if that is going to work for you on a specific property. And here's where it says like, if the seller is going to transfer the agreement to you, or if you're going to pay for part of it, or if the seller is going to pay for part of it. Number 13 is additional provisions. So this is where I'd write in some stuff about termites, if possible, if necessary. This is where I'd write in like where we were closing, like which title company we're closing at too. And sometimes anything else. I mean, lots of things can go here, anything you want within reason. Okay, this is all the fun attorney stuff if we have an issue with the contract. So any dispute, so it's called mediation. Any dispute arising with respect to the contract shall first be submitted to a dispute resolution mediation system servicing the area in which the property is located. Any settlement agreement shall be binding. In the event an agreement not being reached, the parties may pursue legal remedies as provided by the contract. Number 15, this contract shall be governed by and construed in accordance with the laws of the state of Oklahoma without giving effect to any choice of law or conflict of law, rules, or principles that would cause the application of the laws of any jurisdiction other than the state of Oklahoma. Parties agree that all disputes, claims, and causes of action arising out of or related to this contract shall be decided by either Oklahoma state courts or federal courts in the state of Oklahoma. I know you had fun reading that with me. So breach and failure to close. So breach by seller. If buyer performs all obligations of buyer and seller fails to convey title or fails to perform any other obligations of the seller under this contract, then the buyer shall be entitled to cancel the contract and terminate this contract. So if the seller doesn't deliver the abstract to you, then the contract may be canceled. And of course, the seller keeps their abstract. And then the buyer, depending on the situation, may choose to pursue any other remedy available at law or in equity, including specific performance. If you're an attorney, you understand specific performance or things that you can prove that, if the seller did not follow the contract, was in breach of contract, then the hardships that caused you and the monetary value associated with that specific performance. I'm not an attorney. I would suggest consulting one if you're having an issue with this. B, upon breach by buyer. If at any time prior to closing, the buyer's earnest money should fail or lack of delivery, collection pursuant to Chapter 2. So basically, if you don't deliver your earnest money, then the seller has a right to cancel or terminate the contract, pursue any other remedy available at law or in equity, or enter into a written agreement between buyer and seller, modifying the terms of the paragraph 2 to cure the lack of delivery or lack of collection for earnest money. Sometimes we have to write in extra days for it, the earnest money, because it takes a little bit longer than 3 days at times. If after the seller has performed seller's obligation under this contract and buyer fails to provide funding or fails to perform any other obligation under this contract, then the seller may, at seller's option, cancel and terminate this contract and retain all sums paid by the buyer. Guys, this doesn't happen very much. Not to exceed 5% of the purchase price as liquidated damages, or pursue any other remedy available at law or in equity, including specific performance. Consult an attorney if you have questions, please. Number 17, incurred expenses. Buyer and seller agree that anything that they order on the property before closing, they have to pay for. So if buyer orders a home inspection, the buyer has to pay for the home inspection. If the seller orders someone to fix a pipe, the seller has to pay that person to fix the pipe. B, release of earnest money. So if you're renting, listen to this too, if you're renting in Oklahoma. So if we cancel the contract, then of course the seller has to agree to release earnest money, and we have to ask for it back in writing within 30 days. So and it's the same for a renter here in Oklahoma, if you don't ask for your deposit back within 30 days, then they don't have to give it to you. So it's really important that you ask for it back. Now, you don't have to necessarily get it back within those 30 days. Sometimes people drag their feet like crazy, but as long as you ask for it back, you should be able to get it back, even if it's a little bit later. Number 18, this is saying that you want your realtor to deliver or accept contract documents for you. And then number 19, this is always a fun one that they throw in on us, this Irs Tax Law. Okay, so this is a FIRPTA law, and if either the sales price of the property exceeds $300,000 or the buyer does not intend to use the property as a primary residence, then at closing, and as a condition thereto, seller shall furnish to buyer an affidavit in a form and substance acceptable to buyer, signed under penalty of perjury, containing seller's United States Social Security and or taxpayer identification numbers, and a declaration to the effect that seller is not a foreign person within the meaning of Section FIRPTA. So if it's over $300,000 and the seller is not a U.S. citizen, basically, or they don't have residency, then there's special taxes, and so you have to settle those. It's this whole thing usually doesn't come into play, but the title company takes care of that for us. And then number 20, termination of offers. So there is an expiration date on most offers, and usually we give sellers 24 hours to get back to us. And then if they reject it and they don't want to make a counter offer, then they're supposed to sign here. Doesn't happen a ton, but that's what we're supposed to do. And then this is where you would sign if you are the buyer and seller. And this is where the realtor information would go. I know that was so fun for you guys to go over that with me. If you have any questions, you can find my website below, and you can also download this contract document if you would like. I will see you later. Thanks so much for watching.